on Open. Thank you for staying with us. Learning English can be a difficult task, but Lehman College's intensive learning program helps international students to learn and improve their language skills. To tell us more is Bryan Fox, coordinator of the ESL program of Continuing and Professional Studies. It's nice to have you with us,
Yes,
Mr.
thank you.
Fox. ESL has grown up through the years in public schools and, of course, into college. Is there a difference between the way it's handled now, or is it pretty much philosophically the same thing that it's been literally for generations?
Well, like any discipline, we've learned a lot about language acquisition over time. If you studied a language a generation ago, it was a lot of listen and repeat. It was a lot of translation. It wasn't a lot of interaction. And I think sometimes we have students even here who perhaps learned English in their own countries in that way, in a way that wasn't interactive, wasn't enjoyable. And so they're scared to come back into the classroom. But really nowadays, a good English classroom, a good language classroom is interactive. The focus is on the students producing and working with each other. And the focus is on teaching real language, things that the students need. Of course, that involves grammar. It involves all facets of learning a language. But really, the classes are actually fun. And that's something I think that people maybe don't realize if they haven't studied languages in a while, or if they study languages in another country where that interaction is not yet as prevalent.
Mm-hmm. The old style was, and I'm going to make an assumption that it still is, that you don't, like if somebody comes in and they speak Spanish, you don't spend time speaking Spanish. It's all really English. Give me an example of how a class goes.
Sure. I mean, the idea, because we have multinational classes, so the thing is to speak the student's first language, even if the instructor can, wouldn't really help because it wouldn't be fair to the students who don't speak that language. So, in reality, the way that we're working now is working around a theme, something like, how do you make a reservation? How do you use the subway system? Because we have people who are living in New York. How do you rent an apartment? So it's things that we ask, how do you do something, and what's the language that you need to do that thing? So the idea is to demonstrate how it works, and then to get the students to do it. And so really, if you run a language classroom in the right way, you don't need to use the student's first language. We do have a predominantly first language Spanish-speaking student population here, but as I said, it's not all the students by any means. And so, at times, I and some of the other instructors do speak Spanish, and at times, a word or two in Spanish is useful. But in general, the classes are in English, and even from a beginner level, you can manage learning a language without the instruction being in your first language, and that's something I think people don't realize.
What are the considerations for somebody who comes in with, let's say, minimal English? And it doesn't matter to me whether they speak Russian or they speak Spanish. And how long is the expectation for them to be able to get to a point where they can be useful in language? And as I said, what are the factors that go into determining that?
That's a difficult question to answer.
That's my job.
I know, and it's my job to know the answer. But the thing is, language acquisition is tricky. As I'm sure you realize, and as many people realize, if you start learning when you're young, it's much easier. Our students here are adults. Some of them are monolingual, so they don't have a background in learning other languages. In a semester, it's remarkable the progress you can make. But what we do have here, and what we notice, is that a lot of students, because of the lives that they live in New York, are not speaking English enough outside of the class. One of the great things about New York is that you can live a perfectly normal and full existence without English. Whether you speak Spanish or Russian or Mandarin, you can find your community. But the thing is, it's quite limiting. So the intensive programs are 4.5 hours a day, 4 days a week. And that's about the maximum in class that can be beneficial. But then it's up to the student to take what they learn in class and use it outside and study outside. So the thing is, in one semester, one student can show an immense amount of progress and another student not as much. But there's a lot of things that go into that happen outside the classroom as well. And what we have, unfortunately, is many people sort of staying in their first language bubble. And that's a difficult thing because you get comfortable with it. I've lived out of the country for almost 20 years working as a teacher. And I've lived in countries where I did speak the language and where I didn't. And I realized that you fall into a routine. If you speak the language, you do, and if you don't, you don't. And you do the things that you can, and you ignore or adapt to the things that you can't. And so what we really try to promote is to not let that barrier get too high, get too strong, because you can learn the language. We have students who have just arrived a month ago. We have students who've been here decades and just realize now that for professional and personal reasons, they really do need to improve their English. So one of the main things is just not to be afraid, and to realize that in New York, again, I think it's one of the amazing things about New York, most of the people are
People will
speaking
accept
English.
you.
And the thing is, if you speak with an accent here, no one's going to laugh at you. If you go to another, if you go to a small town, another state in the country, you might get a look for speaking English incorrectly, or with making mistakes. That's not the case here. Yeah.
I'm going to throw out one
Yeah.
factor which occurred to me while you were talking, and you alluded to it. If you live in a household and you don't speak Spanish, but you've come to this country and maybe some of the other, you don't speak English, some of the other people in your household speak English, that has got to help you do better.
Sure.
And it also reflects what you said about the importance of getting outside your bubble. Many people, for wonderful reasons, live in a community with people, who are from where they're from, but it doesn't help them learn the language if they're still working on the old language.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is like pushing yourself. An analogy that I often use, it's like going to the gym. You don't necessarily in the morning wake up and want to go to the gym, but once you get there...
How did you know? How did you know?
The gyms that I've joined and not gone to can attest that I feel the same. The thing is, you'd sign up with good faith thinking, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this X days a week, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to... And then, no, it's raining today. It's cold today. Oh, my back hurts. And so the same thing happens with languages. And the thing is, it really is a matter of pushing yourself. And there's motivation that students bring to the class, and there's also the motivation that we foster in the class. And we have a pretty dynamic team of teachers. We're a small program right now, and we really want to be bigger because the need is there. But we have instructors who are trained in this methodology of making the classes fun and interactive. So in the classroom, it's our responsibility to generate that motivation. Outside the classroom, though, it is really up to the student and hopefully the student's family and friends.
There must be incredible amounts of joy because as a teacher, you always want to see your students progress. There is a very obvious and measurable development and way to track. And you must have tremendous satisfaction when you see a student who comes in and barely knows language and applies themselves, and then you see somebody do something totally different that's going to be useful for them.
Sure. I mean, when I started teaching, I didn't even really think about that, having not experienced it. But now, 2 decades into this, it's an amazing feeling when you have a student who comes into the classroom with modest or maybe even no language, and then after a few months is able to communicate with you inside and outside of class. Some of the best success stories that we've had are students who've come into our program and then moved on to study at 2- and 4-year colleges because they now have the English, which allows them to study in an English language medium classroom. So that's really the goal for a lot of students in our program, some of them have university qualifications in their own country, but want to get similar qualifications here. But when they arrive, they don't have the language, and we get students to that level. And I think that, to me, is one of the most amazing things about the program.
I'm going to give you just an anecdote. I work with a young man outside of Bronxnet who he's a Lehman College student and he does web development. He never wants, I introduced him to a Spanish-speaking gentleman. He says, I never want to talk it because he's always working on his English, and of course he now understands well. You wanted to say something in Spanish before you left, and we're going to let you do that.
Okay, bueno, para nuestros vecinos latinos, que no tengan miedo de ponerse en contacto con nosotros, con el programa. La cosa es que la gran mayoría de los que trabajan en el programa son bilingües. Así que si llama a la oficina, le puede atender muy bien en los 2 idiomas. Y por eso la cosa es que hay muchos latinos aquí que pasan, como acabo de decir en inglés, que pasan muchos años aquí y no se esfuerzan en aprender el idioma. Pero es un impedimento muy grande y no tiene que ser así.
Bryan Fox from the Lehman College ESL program, thank you so much.
No
and
problem.
Thank you for the great work you do with young people in the Bronx.
Thanks. All right.
Folks, we'll take a break and we'll be back with more right after this.